Madam Chair, we are ready whenever you are.
All right, I think we're going to call this meeting to order. The B&G Committee is going to begin the meeting. The time is 9:18. I'm calling the committee meeting to order. Rosie, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have a quorum with all members present.
Great. You know, before we move on to public comment, I want to recognize the famous Cynthia Queen as she prepares for her retirement on April 2nd. It's hard to imagine this place without you. Cynthia, on behalf of the committee, we would like to extend our gratitude for your service to SDCERS and specifically the excellent staff work taking care of our members. Thank you, and we wish you the best in your retirement. I would also like to recognize Sandra Clausen as our new Benefit Administration Division Director and welcome her to her first committee meeting. Welcome, Sandra, and we look forward to working with you. Cynthia, you're a tough act to replace.
Like that tomorrow.
All right, moving on to public comment. Rosie, do we have any public comment today?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have a public comment from Mr. Jonathan Heller to speak on his own behalf, and we will hold the public comment until our business and government's action item number 4.
Okay. We're going to hold it until we get to your action item. Thank you, Mr. Hiller. We have 5 action items today on today's agenda, and the first item is staff's recommendation to reappoint Lana Ranchenko to a second term as our independent non-board member of the Audit Committee. Is Lana here?
She is not.
She is not.
That wasn't a requirement, was it?
No. But we are very happy that she has agreed to chair the audit committee again. She's a tremendous audit committee member, and she has an expertise that we need on that committee. So I'm very happy that she said yes.
Yep.
Greg, would you please introduce this action item?
Yes, thank you, Bobby. As Bobby mentioned, we have a audit committee which is comprised of both members of this board and also what we call independent non-board members, so members of our community which are in addition to this governing body. And Lana Ranchenko is one of those independent non-board members. She's allowed to serve 2 terms, and she's completed her first term, and I will say she has served with distinction. As Bobby mentioned, she served for 2 years as our audit committee chair and continues to be a very valuable member of this audit committee. She was here yesterday for our audit committee meeting, but she's not with us here today. She would very much like to continue her service and would really appreciate the board's consideration for her reappointment.
Would any committee member like to speak? No? Hearing no, may I have a motion and a second? Moved by Chris, seconded by Paul. Let's vote.
And with all votes in, Madam Chair, this motion passes 6-0.
Great. Thank you, Rosie. Our second action item is staff's recommendation to approve the SDCERS action plan for fiscal year ending June 30, 2025. Greg, would you please introduce this item?
Yes, thank you. Before the committee is a action item to approve the SDCERS action plan for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025. And the action plan is a living document, and it serves to identify the critical projects we must complete in the near, mid, and long term to achieve our mission, values, and priorities. SDCERS action plan serves as an important tool to focus resources to ensure we consistently align our efforts across the organization. And it's built on the following 4 priorities: excellence in servicing our members, investment program excellence, data accuracy and system integrity, leadership in pension system governance. We believe these priorities really support our mission to deliver accurate and timely service, to invest the portfolio responsibly, and to achieve our strategy of 100% actuarial funding. So in your meeting materials is a proposed action plan for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, which includes 21 critical projects. And you'll be happy to know I don't plan on going into depth on all 21 projects. But I would like to highlight a couple of them which we really deserve a little bit of airtime. One of them is reopening the city pension tiers. We are very close to completing that project, but we need to, as my dad would say, finish strong. We are in phase 3. We think before the end of the year, we'll have the members coming back with their elections and the transfers of monies, and we hope to get that finished before June 30th, but it may have a little bit of spill over into the next fiscal year. And then I think for many years to come after that, we'll have people trickling in. But substantively, we think this project will be done within the next few months. So we're really excited about that. The last piece of that project is then looking at the actuarial funding from the plan sponsor side. And similar to what we did in phase 2, is to have the actuary look at it and say, is the additional contributions required from the plan sponsor significant or material enough that we need to have a special study and bill them separately? So we'll be looking at that. Right now, we don't know the magnitude of the people in phase 3 who are going to wish to come back into service. If there's just a few of them, then we can probably have that just as part of the regular evaluation process. But if all 1,300 say yes, then we might have to study that separately because of the magnitude of the liability. So we're very excited about that, but still remaining focused as an organization on reopening the city plan tiers. The next one would be the benefit process best practices. This is kind of re-engineering kind of how we deliver member services. And we've been going through and challenging ourselves in how we deliver services, what tools we use, and importantly, how do we document those benefit processes? And we are almost at the finish of that program. We're very excited for it. And this is very critical. As you know, we're going through a demographic age wave through SDCERS staff, and we're losing a lot of knowledge experts. So this really helps define and capture that knowledge and experience in our information systems and in our training processes. So we're pretty excited about that. So we're staying focused on that. And this is also an important piece, which you'll hear a little bit about later, for our information technology plan. This is something we need to get done before we can move forward with the rest of our technology plan. I'd also like to highlight an asset liability study that we're doing through the investment team. And this is where we take a look at how do we look at our payments to our retirees and how are those going to flow into the future versus how should we be investing the portfolio? How much risk should we have in the portfolio? How should we deploy those assets? And this is particularly important for some of the issues that are before the board. Irrespective if we pick scenarios 1 through whatever, there will still be an issue with regards to investing the portfolio in the future, and this will begin that conversation of how we do that. So we're pretty excited about that project too. At our board retreat on February 26th, we held a strategic planning session which reinforced our commitment to those 4 priorities I mentioned, and also talked about what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of the organization, and what are some additional items that the board and the committees would like to see addressed through our action plan. And for my notes, we identified 3 of them, and I passed them out to you today. And so we have the board succession planning. We talked about this with the title of board effectiveness at the last 2 board retreats. But this goes through and kind of memorializes that project that we embarked on, and with some additional milestones for the coming year. We talked about the board mentoring program. We'd like to move that forward. Board networking events. That way we can build our professional relationships, improve our effectiveness. And then going through and doing the board effectiveness at the committee level, individual level, moving forward. We also talked about the board retreat, executive succession planning. Yes, I will retire. I'm really hoping to last 4 years, so I'm gonna do my best to make you happy with me for at least 4 years. So that's my goal. But it was really nice at the board retreat to talk about the different reasons you do succession planning, and we talked about the plan. So since we have a date in the future, 4 years from now, how do we put together a plan to effectively transition leadership of the organization? How do we take that time to mentor the potential internal candidates? And what is the roles and responsibilities of the various folks? So what we'd like to do is to begin that process this year, to come up with a plan, to put up a Gantt chart. And so we'll have a timing of what is an effective way to do that. And lastly, stakeholder outreach. I was torn. Do I call that stakeholder outreach, stakeholder engagement, those types of things? But really trying to put down in the action plan our continued meeting with our plan sponsors on a regular basis, meeting with our retiree organizations, meeting with the mayor when they are available. Some mayors like to meet more often than others, but we always make ourselves available. And also meeting with the city council members as needed. Something I've done in the past is community outreach. That has been more reactive than proactive when people said, hey, Greg, will you come speak? Absolutely. Whether that be at a trade association or some organization within our own community, always available. I think I was hearing directly from the board that perhaps I should be a bit more proactive in getting our message out. So in the coming year, I'll try to emphasize that as we move forward. So today, I would appreciate support of the action plan that's in your materials with this amendment. So this would actually go into objective number 4 as our priority number 4. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you. Would any committee member like to speak on this matter?
Yes, please.
Chris?
Got 3 questions, comments. On the executive succession planning, develop CEO competency, I think that's what it says, competencies profile. So we talked about that at the retreat. So then would I be correct in assuming you're going to put something together and bring it back to us and say, do you buy into this? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what I really pivoted off of was Global Governance Advisors, the consultant that came to our board retreat, and they had like the 5 stages of succession planning. And so those are parroted here with regards to milestones. And one of the recommendations from the consultant was you really need to have board leadership through this process. Rely on your staff to do the heavy lifting, but have a lot of oversight. And they talked about having a ad hoc committee or assigning one of the existing committees as oversight. And I'd like to move forward to start with is having this board, this committee, having that oversight as we develop the plan. I think as you start to get into the executive search, the actual looking at candidates, that's probably something where the board would want to do it as an entire body or have an ad hoc committee to do those interviews.
Yeah, and the only thing I would encourage, and that sounds fine, is that it's something of a living document so that it's updated over time. Yep. Because if we do it in 2025 and let it sit, and then 3 years after that you retire, and the board at that time says, yeah, well, those aren't the competencies we're looking for, it's not going to help anybody, right? So I think we need to keep it up to date.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Second question was mayoral meetings. Do you ever meet with the head of the port or airport, the elected head? I'm just wondering whether that would be useful also.
So when I say plan sponsor meetings, we regularly meet quarterly with the airport team and the port team.
Okay.
We meet quarterly. We used to, they would meet here, we would meet at their offices back and forth. Then COVID, we all met virtually. We're still in a transition of where we meet. Usually we're meeting with the head of finance, HR, and member services, kind of that equivalent. Occasionally, the CEO or the director will join those meetings, but not often, but sometimes. And occasionally, we will be asked to present the actuarial valuations to their entire oversight body.
Yeah, I'm only thinking that when you're speaking to the mayor, you're speaking to the elected head of the body, right? So, you've got the Port Commission with Frank Hertassen at the head right now, old friend of mine, but that's beside the point. And I don't know who is who is the chair of the airport authority, but I'm just wondering whether it would be worthwhile, if they're the equivalents of the mayor, to meet with those people. So it's just a thought.
Okay, thank you.
And then just last comment on community outreach. This was a big, fun conversation at the retreat about how we can encourage or bring as many stakeholders as possible out there in the community into a better feeling about the value of this organization. And I would just like to encourage that we go as far as we can there. I can picture Jessica writing op-eds. I picture all kinds of great stuff coming out of this, and I just want to encourage best efforts in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. All worthwhile comments. Good ideas. So may I have a motion and a second from the committee members? Great. Moved by Tom, seconded by Alvin. Now we're voting. Rosie?
And with all votes in, Madam Chair, this motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Our third action item is staff's recommendation to approve SDCERS administrative budget for fiscal year ending June 30, 2025. And we have Ted. Will you please introduce this action item?
This time.
1 second as I get situated here. You have a number of documents within your board packet, so I'm pleased to present the SDCERS FY 2025 budget. And staff recommends the board approve next year's fiscal year budget. Good, it works. And looking at the big picture, SDCERS has a budget of $18.3 million for next fiscal year. This is up $1.2 million or 7.1% from the FY24 budget. There's two major reasons for that. If you look at the actual budget document itself, one number jumps out at you really, really quickly, and that's the city negotiated pay increases for multiple years. That has an impact on us, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. And of course, a lower increase, but still an increase for IT services, specifically contractual increases for all of them. In addition, there's an increased emphasis on cybersecurity, and penetration testing is now moving into the IT group as part of their annual budget. This graph, this pie chart really jumps out at you and explains that SDCERS is an employee-driven organization with more than 62% of our budget allocated to salaries and benefits. And looking at our staffing plan for next fiscal year, SDCERS will be reduced by one particular head. As you're well aware, the city has outsourced its retiree healthcare process. We had a couple of unclassified retirements within the healthcare division, and we're using this as an opportunity to reposition staff, more specifically with the fact that the city has reopened their pension system. And as you heard earlier, there's a lot of complex issues that have arisen. As a result of this, we're adding a new position, an unclassified project coordinator position to benefits administration, primarily to deal with this increased complexity. Salaries and benefits is $11.8 million. This is an increase of 9.4% from the previous fiscal year. As a result, it's important to note that the FY24 budget does not have the entire FY24 costs for salaries and fringe. This time last year, the city was still in the process of negotiating with their employee represented unions. We had no idea what was going to come out of it, whether or not it was a 1-year or a 3-year process. And consequently, we had estimated an approximately 5%, depending on when those increases would occur. And then instead, as we know now, the city had a 5% on July the 1st and a 5% on January 1st, which impacted my FY24 numbers, which kind of raises the bar such that when we start figuring out FY25, which I already have the values because the city has published that information, we actually have a significant increase overall on the budget. So it explains, it's just number compounding for the fact that there's multiple years of increases given times for the city. As I had mentioned at the start of this, the second group that had an increase was IT, but once again, primarily due to contractual reasons and increased emphasis on cybersecurity. And looking at Johnny's area, his budget will be $400,000 for the next fiscal year. This is an increase of about $150,000, but it's important to note that we have new fiduciary counsel, and that's the increase on the fiduciary legal fees, and as a result of dealing with increased complexity in fiduciary matters. There's an increase to disability and administrative hearings, but once again, this is a projection and legal's best guess on this particular item. Lastly, there's an increased budget for the compliance and privacy programs in the general section. Turning now to capital expenditures, we will have a budget of about $704,000 for the next fiscal year. The primary reason for these projects is the modernization of IT, and as Greg had alluded to, there is an information technology portion of the action plan which spans multiple years. So IT is focusing on modernizing operations, equipment, software as necessary. In addition, there's additional projects in here related to enhancing network operations and once again, enhancing our IRIS pension benefit system. One of the areas, though, I mentioned IRIS just now, is general operations. A number might have jumped out at you as a really large decrease, and that's associated with depreciation. Depreciation is a non-cash expense, which we report out in our financial statements, but consequently, the IRIS system turns 10 from an implementation standpoint this May. A lion's share of that asset will be fully depreciated by the time we enter FY 2025, hence the large drop in depreciation expense, offset by a slight increase for rent. We're on the 8th floor now. It's important to note that our rent holiday is now complete. We will have 12 months of actual rent payments and CAM charges, but it should also be noted that the total amount of rent is far cheaper than when we were on the 4th floor and will be so for the foreseeable future. SDCERS manages its administrative budget with prudent cost controls, given the fact that we're dealing with an increasingly complex plan. As we've mentioned, Prop B continues to be a large project for us. In addition, the port has added a new plan, so we're in the process of multi-divisional project related to creating that plan within the Irish pension system and making sure that all that information flows through correctly like it does for all the other systems. In looking at this, we try to maintain prudent cost controls over those items that we can have discretion over. But for those items that we don't, we monitor and report that impact to the board. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the members?
Yeah, Bobby, thank you. On your big picture slide about budget for the past, whatever, X number of years, you had a nice graph there. Are you able to put that up?
Oh.
Or sorry, yep. So am I reading it correctly that we've been over budget every year since 2020?
So I'll say based upon the graphs, yes, but the caveat is the city has not finished their fringe benefit rates. So what ends up happening to us is we go with the latest available information from the city of San Diego, and we know that that number is not correct as of this moment in time. But I don't guess based upon what those rates are. I only provide you with the latest available information, and if I am over budget in that particular category, I'll explain it to the board every time we report out the quarterly values. And then on occasion, as for certain expenses, say for instance like legal, it's based upon an estimation process. What will actual litigation costs be? What will actual fiduciary costs be? How many disability cases will we hear in a year? Legal has actually been a declining item, and this is the first time in a while that it's gone up a little bit. But the idea is that it's dependent upon the actual delivery of our services and the work that legal has to do in various areas. So once again, I can't say this is a hard number. I will report out what actually occurs as it does occur.
Thanks, Ted. So if we approve the budget and things beyond our control happen mid-year, which is
Yes.
really what you're saying, is that something you come back and ask for approval to amend the budget, or you just note that, hey, we're going to be over budget because of this or that?
I think the philosophy, I'll let Greg touch this one because I know he's itching to do so.
Yes, I am. So when I joined the team 6 years ago, the culture was budget high. We don't want to come in, over budget. And I said, well, actually, I think a better relationship between the board, the committee, and staff would be, what's the most realistic budget you can put in? And so that's really what we're looking for, is really what is a reasonable spending plan. And as Ted said, there's some things that are within our control, some things that are not our control. Traditionally, we have not come as a kind of a bureaucracy to say, well, let's keep adjusting the budget as things change. What I want to make sure is that when we come to the board, let's say for a project where we want to do an RFP, actuarial services, and we budgeted $100,000, and we do the RFP and it comes in to be $150,000. To me, that should come back to the board to say, hey, look, the spending plan we thought we had isn't. We need additional approval to move forward. And so, to me, it's more of on a project by project basis or a purchase by purchase basis. Is what did we put into the budget as what we thought we were going to do? If it's really materially different, then we need to talk about it again. And so it's more of a conversation between the spending plan and the oversight to make sure that we have alignment and that's the direction we want to go, but not so much adjusting the budget. So In other words, I never really want to say, can we move forward with a project or an effort at this dollar amount, and you find out later and a surprise that it was 2x or twice that cost. I want to have that conversation up front and get your permission up front before I spend that additional money.
Okay.
I think you're thinking a little bit like the city and how the city budgets, right? So
Yes.
that doesn't apply as much to SDCERS. And when I say that, I say that with the fact that we do sit on top of our costs as much as possible. But for instance, we are beholden to the city when it comes to negotiated MOUs. We don't have a choice in that. And so as a result, I have to guesstimate what impact that has on our budget. We have our own accounting system. The city uses SAP. We try to get information from the city and translate that into our system, but I have to draw a line, a measurement line at a point in time to provide you with the information to allow our board to come up with that spending plan for the next fiscal year. The city's budget process is their own, and it's something that they have certain requirements. I know that there's a lot of specific municipal code issues that relate to this, but that's not something that applies to our fiduciary duty to service our members. And I like Greg's approach in the sense that we provide you the most accurate values as possible. And then, as he pointed out, when you have specific numbers related to items, say, for instance, you see in the budget, there's the actuary. The actuary is going to be dependent upon the RFP and the actuary you hire and what the board asks of that actuary to do for us, because there are costs associated with each one of those asks. And consequently, I will report out what actually occurs. And as Greg points out, if he knows that the budget is going to be over or under, which it has been and also in the past, we report that information to the board on an ongoing basis. But the board approves the budget, and then they approve the special projects, who we hire for council, major items such as the actuary, the auditors, for instance, and things like that.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So, yeah, I am looking at it from a city perspective, having managed a division and received feedback when I was over budget, shall we say.
I understand.
But from a governance perspective, it just seems to me if we, this body, approves the budget, then at the point where you determine that, hey, we're going to be over budget because of something or other, then it seems from a governance perspective, you come back to us and say, hey, such and such is going on mid-year, and I just want to let you know we're going to have to spend more money than you originally approved.
And that makes sense. And in my comments, use the word materiality. So when we have a material variance, absolutely, that's part of the conversation. And I also want to say our governance structure has bumpers or guardrails, however you want to say it. I have very limited spending authority outside of this budget. The board has delegated $50,000 for, if operational needs that come up on an ad hoc basis. So anything over $50,000 in an $18 million budget, I'm coming back to you to talk about it. And so it's not a blank check, so to speak, with regards to how we operate. It's really trying to find the most effective and efficient use of our limited time together in these meetings.
Thanks. Second question, I have three questions. Second question, on the disability hearings, you mentioned that you anticipate more in the coming year. Could you just explain why?
So I would let Johnny talk about disability hearings, but we also added the category. You see it says disability and administrative hearings, and that's a new category.
Okay, thank you. Before you turn it over to Johnny, what's the average cost of a disability hearing?
I don't manage those costs on a case-by-case basis.
Just like a big picture, whatever.
I can answer those
Okay,
questions.
thanks.
So just overall, the cost for disability hearings have increased. I think along with everything has increased cost. As we have new membership, I think it's a sign also that we should have increased disability retirement applications. We also started tracking administrative hearings that sometimes go to a hearing officer and capture those costs as well, as opposed to put them somewhere else. As far as how much does each administrative hearing cost, usually between $10,000 and $15,000.
Thank you.
All right?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then my last question was, in the budget, you mentioned that you talk about the, I think, investment expenses. And my question is, you talked about how you separately budget investment oversight, I believe.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the investment memo?
So Ted, can you just share, how do we handle investment expenses? There's some that are going through the administrative budget and some that are not.
Yes. So the division, in this case, the investments division, everything for that division in the ACFR, the ACFR, is listed as an investment expense, because if we didn't have investments, you wouldn't necessarily have an investment division. Budgeted items within that, Division 105, salaries and fringe, for instance, is actually part of the administrative budget, but it flows through not on the administrative expense line in the ACFR, it flows through on the investment expense line, and we try to provide those costs.
So to translate that,
Sorry about that.
so when we look at budgeting, the investment program is probably our most expensive program to operate. Some of those costs are charged against the earnings of the fund directly. Some of those costs are run through the administrative budget. And so the funds that are, or the costs that are run through the administrative budget are staffing costs for our internal staff, the tools that they use. The bulk of the manager expenses, the custodian bank expenses, those are all charged against the earnings of the portfolio and don't flow through this document.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you. So I guess where I was getting to is when we report out, or the investment folks report out returns on investments, and they report them out net of fees, right? Mm-hmm. To what degree are some of these administrative expenses included in that net of fees? So in other words, you have an active manager for an investment or whatever. In that case, that's reported out net of fees, right? But then we have Aon, for example, big picture advisor or whatever. Does that get netted out, so to speak, or is that just seen as a cost of doing business that is unrelated to return on investment?
That is seen as a cost of business, but my understanding is that it does show up in the performance numbers. It would not be attributable to a specific manager.
Okay.
But when you're looking at the assets of the total portfolio,
okay,
you know, they're just looking how much money you got.
Okay.
And we pay fees out, so it reduces the value of the total portfolio.
So when we report net of fees in the ACFR, that part is taken into account. Right. But on the individual returns on investment, it's just manager. Yeah, it's just right. That manager. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Question, sorry. I have much more basic questions. 18.3.
Yes.
Where is that derived from? Where is that generated from? Is that generated from fees taken out of each paycheck?
Oh,
is
okay.
that percent?
And maybe you should explain the financial relationship between the city and SDCERS.
Correct. So we have an overall administrative budget, and that 18.3 is developed, and you kind of wonder, hey, how are we actually funded? Are we taking it from investment earnings? And the reality is, from an actuarial standpoint, we have an administrative expense cost allocated to each of the plan sponsors based upon their proportionate ratios. So in the end, when they pay their ADC payment, they are making a payment on our administrative costs. So the reality is that we're technically, I don't want to say, have to be funded by the plan sponsors, separate and distinct from the elements that are actually calculated in the actuarial valuations.
Can I
Go
say
ahead,
that in
Greg.
other words?
Yeah, please.
So in a defined contribution plan, not like SDCERS, but in a defined contribution plan, usually there's an administrative load that's passed on to the members. We don't do that. So in our plan, what we do is we come up with this budget, and then we'll charge those expenses to the assets of the trust. When we put together our actuarial funding, the actuary comes out and says, you know, this is how much the members need to pay for their portion of the benefit. This is how much the employer, the plan sponsor, needs to pay for their portion of the benefit. And there's also an administrative load that's paid or pre-funded by the plan sponsor. It's an assumption. So what the actuary tries to guess is, what do we think SDCERS budget's going to be next year? And so they baseline it through the experience study that we do every 3 years, and then they grow up a little bit by inflation. So there's a little mismatch, but it's primarily funded by the plan sponsor.
So any over budget items are then subsequently added to the year after plan sponsors' requirement to pay? Or where does that get reimbursed? And that also tells me that there is no reserve account that we're pulling from then, is that correct?
So our reserve account, in one respect, is $10 billion. So the cost for operating this business is charged against the trust assets of $10 billion. What we tried, it used to be that was the end of the story. But the actuarial community said, well, perhaps we should either reduce your, now we're getting into the weeds a little bit, we should reduce your assumed rate of return because you're to take into account for the administrative expenses. So rather than 6.5, maybe our investment return would be 6.4 to cover that. That's probably not the right relationship, but having a little bit lower. Or you can have a separate assumption where the employer separately puts in anticipated funds for your administrative expense. So it's more of a funding mechanism rather than directly charging the employer back and forth.
Where is the safeguard for the member that SDCERS doesn't overspend what's in the trust accounts?
Open public meetings is really the safeguard for the membership. Our core value of transparency. Putting forth our spending plans like this, this is how we want to operate and spend the trust funds. Our policies on educational and board travel, following the city's spending guidelines with regards to travel, going through the city's personnel department with regards to how much staffing costs and going through those checks and balances. Having on every board meeting, Ted will have the financial statements and occasionally the budget reports that shows this is where we are with regards to spending those monies. Those are really the safeguards.
Last question, has there been any conversations in the past to put a reserve account in place so that those overages, since we have a history of unpredictable costs that have to be paid, is there any thoughts of putting a reserve account in place?
So my first answer is no,
Okay.
but a little bit longer answer is in looking at, we wouldn't need a reserve account. And the reason why I would say that is administrative expenses are factored into the information that we put in the ACFR. Consequently, from a basic income statement, you've got revenue and then expenses, equals our net earnings, which adds to our overall retained earnings balance, so to speak. So let's say we do go over. That will be factored into the money-weighted rate of return that is listed in the ACFR, and that's an accounting requirement, not necessarily the investment side that we were just talking about. So consequently, when you say guardrails, we consistently report out what our administrative expenses actually are with each latest financial statement that I present to the board. If we go over budget, it is something that, as we have kind of alluded to here, this is our best guess at our spending plan for the coming fiscal year. Individual items will be discussed, but when I look at the cost of what it takes to run a retirement system, we plan, we report, and then we tell you what actually happened. And at the end, when we get to the end of the fiscal year, I'll provide you with a year-end actual budget statement prior to the end of the annual audit, telling you, here's how we wound up, in comparison to what we had budgeted for FY25. Your questions operate at a level of precision that we don't necessarily get to. When we talk about what we put in the ADC for administrative expenses, I think our actuaries have used the term decimal dust in terms of the materiality of the difference.
Right.
And the idea is that we have a limited amount of time, so we are servicing our members. Everybody is devoted to this system, and I will keep you apprised as to what's going on. And if something significant comes up, you can be guaranteed that our CEO will bring that to your attention, and I'll put it within the reports, and you will also see that.
First of all, I would love to have that type of decimal dust. That sounds amazing. And second, I guess I'm inappropriately judging the pension as a very, very tight trust fund that has to be very clear in and out type of actions. But I guess the investment returns are also going into that,
Yes.
which is also your administrative fees are coming out of those investment returns at the same time.
That's why I also look at, what we call the accounting money-weighted rate of return against the actual investment return that is calculated by the investment consultants.
Okay.
But we disclose all that information.
Thank you for the clarification.
This is the most questions I've gotten in a long time, so
Isn't
I
it
appreciate that.
exciting?
I'm like, I get to
know.
be
I
an
love it.
accountant, but then
Yeah.
it's like, Ted, stay out of the
I
weeds.
know. Tanasi would be so happy, wouldn't he?
I got to
Yes.
say, Ted, this stuff is just fascinating.
Oh, you guys are spoiling me. Thank you.
Don't leave. Don't leave yet.
I know.
So SDCERS generates its own financial statements. It's a separate entity. It's reported in the footnotes of the city financial statements, but it's totally separate. The city has, what I learned by reading the city's ACFR, is they have 3 separate entities: fiduciary, component
Units,
entities, units, right. The Housing Commission, the Convention Center, and SDCERS, and they are not included in the operations of the city. They're separate, although disclosed in the footnotes. So Ted, how does it work? For example, actually I'm asking you a question I know the answer to. For example, SDCERS processes the healthcare reimbursements for the city. And that's really not part of providing retirement benefits for the city. So
Right.
how is it that this SDCERS gets reimbursed for that?
So that's another separate process that I actually provide an invoice. It's actually part of the actual budget process. The healthcare division is a separate division within our overall administrative budget. There's salaries and fringe, there's actual expenses associated with that. But because we cannot use trust fund dollars to do that, I accumulate costs associated with direct costs in the investment division, plus we have an assumed load, percentage study of the member services division, some of finances time, some of HR's time, and that came out of an internal audit years ago, and such that I then send a bill to the city. And then you'll see in our ACFR a separate fund for healthcare, retiree healthcare. That is separate and distinct from the trust fund associated with the payment of retirement benefits. So in summary, I invoice the city for those costs, make sure that they're not accounted for at all within the trust fund and are accounted within their separate fund.
And all of the employees here are city employees. So is the city reimbursed for the employee costs from SDCERS?
Yes, you know the answer to that question too. So the idea is we have an arm's length series of transactions with the cities. The city manages our benefits and our payroll services. Consequently, they send me a file that then puts that information within my accounting system. You'll be glad to know that I audit that against the actual invoice that they then send us, saying, hey, here's your bill for your salaries and benefits. And then we cut them a check. I first approve it, and then Greg is the second approver for all of those invoices.
So it's truly a standalone entity.
So this budget doesn't have to go back to city council for any approval then?
Right.
Fantastic.
We do provide it to them, we do present to them, and we do answer questions that they may have.
Right.
But at the same time, they're not necessarily approving our budget. Our board
Yeah, they're
does.
not an oversight.
But did the plan sponsor have oversight over the planned budget going forward if there are major increases? Because those increases hit their contribution. None, zero. Got it. Thank you.
No.
All right. Thanks, Ted.
Thank
You did
you.
a great job. I guess we need a motion.
Oh, I'm on the wrong page here.
And a second? All voting? Rosie?
With all votes in, this motion passes 6-0.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ted. It was a big day for finance. I keep the faith, Ted. I have a feeling you'll be asked questions throughout the year. Thank you. All right. Staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Jonathan Heller. And Mr. Heller, I understand that you have some comments.
I do. Good morning, committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I appreciate being here. I started working at the Airport Authority in May of 2015, and SDCERS classified me as a general plan or a classic member. 8 years later, I received a very apologetic phone call from SDCERS telling me that they had made a mistake. SDCERS switched me to the PEPRA tier and told me that I owed nearly $65,000 in retroactive employee contributions, plus $15,000 in interest. The interest has since been waived. 3 days after I was notified of this change, I received my first paycheck under PEPRA. My employee contribution had increased by $1,000 a month, and my benefit upon retirement is greatly reduced. Now, I want to be very clear. I'm not here to argue that you should make me a classic member again. I understand how PEPRA works, but I am asking you, to please waive collection of the $65,000 underpayment, which would have a devastating impact on my family's financial security. As you can imagine, this change in my pension was shocking news, and I'm personally less than a decade away from what was a carefully planned retirement. SDCERS has acknowledged that they mistakenly assigned me to the incorrect tier, and they've acknowledged that they knew about the mistake for years but failed to act sooner, and they've apologized. And honestly, since this has all happened, staff has been very gracious and helpful, and I do appreciate that. Staff says it does not have the authority to waive collection of the $65,000 underpayment. However, as a board, your own policies and procedures state that the board does have that discretion. SDCERS policy on internal procedures for overpayments and underpayments of benefits and contributions states, quote, for any correction over $10,000, only the board has the discretion to resolve the matter for less than the full amount. Only the board has that discretion. SDCERS charters, policies, and rules of the Board of Administration states, any resolution of an underpayment exceeding $10,000 that does not result in full payment of the entire amount must be approved by the board. Staff points to a different section of the policy where it states, resolution of an underpayment that exceeds $10,000 should result in immediate full payment of the entire amount plus interest whenever feasible. I draw your attention to those last two words, whenever feasible. I would argue respectfully that asking me to pay $65,000 because somebody checked the wrong box 8 years ago does not fall under any reasonable definition of the word feasible. A core value at SDCERS is to provide financial security for its members, but
Mr.
staff's
Heller?
recommendation,
You're 15 seconds over. Can you just wrap it up?
I'm wrapping up. Thank you. I beg your indulgence for about 30 more seconds.
Okay.
A core value at SDCERS is to provide financial security for its members, but staff's recommendation results in exactly the opposite for me. I'm asking that you, as a committee of the policy-making body of SDCERS, to not let this stand. I ask that this committee recommend to the board that it use its discretion and waive collection of the $65,000 underpayment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Heller.
Thank
Susan?
you. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Heller. What you have before you, as you're aware, is staff's recommendation to deny the appeal of Mr. Heller. As Mr. Heller stated, he joined SDCERS in 2011. He left the city initially in 2013, leaving his contributions on account. He then joined the airport in 2015. Thereafter, as you heard, staff did err, and we do apologize, and we classified him as a classic member when he should have been a PEPRA member. In 2023, this was corrected, and he is now a PEPRA member. Accordingly, he has underpaid contributions. The interest has been waived, but staff would urge this board and this committee to recommend to the board that the contributions be collected. Staff believes that the board has a fiduciary duty and under the plan must collect the contributions. And we would request that you deny the appeal of Mr. Heller. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chris, I'm sure you have a comment.
Mr. Heller, I have read these documents about 5 times. And I first want to thank you for taking the time. Obviously, I understand your reasoning, but the level of articulation in here and detail is really essential, I think, to our oversight role, because obviously this should never have happened, and we would not want to see this ever happen again. So the circumstances here and the way you've laid it out in such detail give me, at least as a board member, a sense of a need to take whatever action is appropriate for one of 13 people up here to try to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. So thank you for that. And I also want to add my apologies for what's happened here, because aside from what may or may not, or what may take place today, what decision may be made, in addition to the stress that's involved and so forth, obviously there's been a lot of time involved and everything else. So I'm sorry about that. So Susan, I have several questions sort of about our situation and where we are. So when Mr. Heller was originally misclassified, do we know whether that was by the port or by SDCERS?
My understanding is that the initial occurrence is that the payroll clerk at the port contacted us, and we verified that it was, I'm sorry, at the airport contacted us, and we verified that he was a classic member.
So,
I believe it was our error.
okay, so what you think happened is the clerk gets in touch with SDCERS, says, how do we classify this person? And we gave the clerk the wrong information? Okay.
I believe so.
Okay, thanks. So there's this big issue about our flexibility here in terms of waiving some or all of this. And I'm really struggling, having read our fiduciary counsel's advice, your reference to federal law, or I guess regulations, so on and so forth. And so in your memo, you say federal tax law requires that the underpayment of contributions be collected. And you're referring to the IRS regs, right? And before I go further on that, why is interest not included in that?
From the federal tax law perspective,
Well, you're telling us that essentially your reading of IRS regs is that we cannot waive some of these costs, some or all of the costs. Okay, we figure that some of our loss to the trust is lost interest that we would have been able to generate, or something along those lines. I guess that's the concept here, right? In other words, his contributions weren't enough. We didn't generate that interest. We need to recoup that interest from him.
so my understanding, and I am not a tax lawyer,
Okay.
is that the contributions have always been owed, right? But interest, there are some discretions. We're placing the member back in the place that he should have been, because he should have always been in PEPRA.
Sure. So I'm only asking, why are you advising us that we can waive the interest, but we can't waive part of the missed contribution under IRS regs?
I can help answer that question, if you don't mind. So I have personally been dealing with this correction for nearly a year, trying to find every way possible to resolve this and assist our members while maintaining our tax qualification, while maintaining our fiduciary duty to not just Mr. Heller, but all of SDCERS members. And in a nutshell, what we have is an opinion from our tax counsel and our fiduciary counsel, but focusing on tax right now. And what the regulations say is when SDCERS or any other administrator messes up, we want to make that member whole. We want to make it as if that error did not occur. So the corrections should fit within those parameters and not violate other areas of tax law. So that, in a sense, is how do we correct what we made, the error that we made, which is collect the contributions that Mr. Heller should have been paying all along, if not for our error, if not for the wrongful offsets from the airport that we collected. And then if Mr. Heller's contributions were with SDCERS, every July 1st, Mr. Heller's account would have received interest on those accounts. So we are missing that interest. So to your question, Mr. Brewster, why are we collecting the contributions and not the interest? It comes into my opinion and shared with your fiduciary counsel as well, but I'll own it, is that the law is that if a retirement system or other public agency sits on its hands and causes harm to its member, under certain circumstances, the law will not allow SDCERS or another agency to benefit from that situation. So we're in a situation here where Mr. Heller would have, if we had done it all right, you would never have had to pay that interest. And only because of SDCERS's failure to correct that did he accumulate that interest. And so I believe, it's my opinion, that a state law would and can waive that interest because of SDCERS's delay. So that is why, and that's how, and the IRS regulations recognize state law for interests of common law areas like that. Now, the issue is, well, what about the employee contributions? Can we waive that? And now we're running into situations where we have a airport plan that says Mr. Heller and every other Pepper member has to pay their employee contributions, and the airport can't pay for that. On top of that, we have Pepper as state law enforced by our state offices that require that a member pay their fair share of the employee contributions. And so it's my opinion that the plan just simply requires in this situation for an employee who has missed contributions to fund their future retirement benefit, to have enough money in the system to pay their fair share, so when Mr. Heller retires, we can continue to pay his benefit for the rest of his life.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, Johnny. So where I am, and just as one board member, is clearly Mr. Heller should be in the Pepper system, and he acknowledges that. Clearly, had he been put in the system way back when, he would have either paid this or decided, hey, this is too much money, I'm going to go work someplace else or whatever. I mean, he would have had that opportunity. And we did not provide him that opportunity to make that decision, or we obstructed that opportunity. I mean, he may have decided to continue anyway, but no one will ever know. So our fiduciary counsel says that the employee plans compliance resolution system provides certain safe...
I would just ask that you not read attorney-client privilege stuff in public, but if you could conclude what the statement is, I think that's fair. But
Okay.
thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay. It would appear from advice that we have received that there are some safe harbor methods of correcting plan qualification errors, including correcting administrators' failure to follow the terms, and that there's not specific methods of correction in context with defined benefit plans. That's what I got out of the advice that we received. There's also a reference to our policies that seems to allow us in certain circumstances, let's see, our policy that the board has the discretionary authority to resolve error corrections by receiving less than the full amount due to SDCERS from a member, or alternatively by directing SDCERS staff to pursue the full amount of mistaken underpayments from the member. So it seems that there is some discretion here that under our policy that we can exercise should we wish, at least the way I read that. And in reading Mr. Heller's appeal, I must say that in a number of areas he's said, I understand that you may not feel comfortable refunding the entire amount. And I appreciate that, because I think that gets back to this issue of, he would have had to pay it had we done it right to start with. So I don't think he's arguing that there's not some obligation there. So I'd like to make a couple of motions. I'd like to make a motion and another motion after that, if I may. But maybe I don't want to interrupt somebody else wanting to comment.
Are there any other comments? Alvin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What has been the options that have been offered for settlement of the funds, or payment plans, or whatever that may be? What has been offered?
He was contacted and offered a payment plan previously, and that's been the only offer that's, for lack of a better term, that's been extended.
Has there been any more communication about a reduction in the amount so that it would be less of a burden?
We do not settle these. There has to be payment of the underpaid contributions.
Okay. And then if in the appeals process, that appeals process, just remind me, where does that go again? If we approve an appeal, does that start the appeal?
You mean if you grant the denial of the appeal?
If we grant the approval of the appeal,
So if you side
That
with
goes-
Mr. Heller,
does that go to the board? I just want to understand. So that goes to the board for.
yeah,
for-
so this committee is just charged with making a recommendation
Right.
to what the board should do, but the actual decision rests tomorrow with the board.
Okay. Just clarifications. Thank you.
Yeah.
Tom?
Sorry, I have a few notes that I'm reading. When did Mr. Heller separate from service with the airport?
He still currently works with the airport.
And that payment plan, would that be a contribution out of a paycheck, or would he be directly writing a check each month or quarter, or however that payment plan looked like? And is that still an active,
I believe it was the contributions were, it was on May 23rd, 2023, they wrote to him, and it was the contribution increase was the payment plan. They haven't actually contacted him for the actual payment plan per se. That would occur after this. So I'm sorry if that was a little bit of a misstatement on my end.
no worries. Is Mr. Heller allowed to use any other retirement savings account to pay for that amount, such as a 401k or some other supplemental savings account that the airport may have provided to him as an employee
Yes.
as a rollover?
Yes.
If we don't approve the denial, which means we say no today, and tomorrow the board says no, does that mean the appeal is granted, and what does that process look like?
If the board tomorrow does not grant Mr. Heller's appeal, then more or less it's finalized from the SDCERS decision-making. And then it's Mr. Heller's decision to pursue it further through continued administrative appeal here or to file an action in Superior Court to challenge that decision.
And if the final ending was, we're not going to recover those underpayments, who pays for that underpayment? Is that part of the ADC to the airport?
So your question is, if the board decides not to pursue the missed contributions, what happens to those? I guess we would need some direction from the board if the board wants staff to fund his account, meaning that money comes from somewhere, from, I suppose, the trust fund to Mr. Heller's account, and then the account would have less, essentially, for the airport authority but to pay its future benefits.
Which trust fund?
The airport's
The airports.
portion of the trust fund.
Come out of their UAL essentially in the big picture, right?
If the board would decided to collect, to not do anything further for that loss, then I assume that would go to the UAL.
And with any of the plan sponsors, has this happened before,
Employee contributions?
where the employee contributions were waived and not paid back to the trust?
Not to my knowledge since I have been here. So since 2010. Prior to that, I'm not confident exactly what has happened.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
So what is Mr. Heller's recourse if we deny the appeal?
What are Mr. Heller's options if
Yeah.
the board decides not to grant his appeal?
Right.
There is a way he could reconsider with this board, which is kind of an extra step if we were missing evidence or he had further evidence to bring that would possibly change this board's decision tomorrow. Or again, his other option would be to file an action against SDCERS in a court of law to challenge that decision.
I see. Okay.
So
Mr. Brewster?
so thank you. So, and I'm assuming that if he were to pursue that, we go to Superior Court, and there's some sort of negotiations that, well, there's discussions that go on. Possibly the case gets settled for some amount in between. We end up with court costs. Mr. Hiller ends up with court costs, and so on. What's unusual about this case, I think, is the number of times that Mr. Heller got in touch with us and said, hey, I think I'm in the wrong plan here. What's the story? And what absolutely amazes me is that this actually got personally on the desk of our deputy CAO, and nothing happened. And I just, it boggles my mind that we got to that point and that happened. Susan, what was the first date that Mr. Heller got in touch with us?
2018. It was June 8th, 2018.
Okay. So my motion is to waive Mr. Heller's contributions from that date until the date that we notified him, which I think was last May or something like that, that he was being put in the PEPRA system. That's my motion.
Sorry, can we do that motion at this current junction?
Well, we can do whatever we want.
So-
Whether the board agrees to it is.
Wouldn't that motion be tomorrow? Because our job today is to.
Okay, let me restate the motion. I move that we recommend to the board everything I said before.
So what we need now is a second.
Actually, if someone could just please assist me, because I have to enter the verbiage.
Sure, sorry. So it
Accurately.
is to waive
The
recommend to the board, SDCERS board,
I apologize, Mr. Brewster. Is it motion to,
a motion to recommend to the SDCERS board of administration that Mr. Heller's contributions from
June 8th, 2018.
June 8th, 2018 until, do you remember?
They corrected the membership on May 4th, 2023.
To May 4th, 2023. Oh, did I go too fast?
yes, you speak extremely fast, and I
Oh.
appreciate that.
Gee whiz, I thought I was talking slowly.
Chris, real quick, sorry, point of order real quick. So I think I think that should be made tomorrow. I think the only thing today is, I believe your motion is to deny the denial of the appeal for Jonathan Heller. And then tomorrow would be the recommendation how you want to deal with it. Am I not correct?
No, because what I'm asking is for this committee's support of my motion, and then the committee, if it succeeds, if the motion succeeds, then Bobby would go to the board tomorrow and say, on a vote of 3-2 or whatever it may be, we recommend to you the following.
Because you still need a dollar figure to attach to the recommendation. I don't know that you have.
That's too complicated. Because that's to be determined, I suppose, because they'll have to figure that out. There's no way for me to come up with that.
Which is why, okay.
So Susan's going to get this sorted.
I just want to know what our fiduciary impact is to the motion. That's why I'm asking.
Well, if I can jump in, I review these cases when they come up because I really want to be try to sit in the board's seat and go, does this make sense, yes or no? You know, prove to me the case law, prove to me the federal law or the federal guidelines, the state law. And in this case, as much as it hurts me, I agree with staff's recommendation. I don't believe the board has clear authority to grant Mr. Heller's recommendation. And I appreciate Chris saying, you know, the board can do whatever they want to do. That's true, but there's ramifications of do whatever you want to do. You know, acting without expressed authority, you leave yourself open up to other risk. That happened with the city and the service credit purchase litigation, where the plan sponsor sued us because they thought we acted beyond our authority. And we lost that case. So, you know, that's why I think you see staff and fiduciary counsel and tax counsel being very careful on working with expressed authority versus implied authority. My understanding is that, yes, this board could grant Mr. Heller's request. I think there's organizational risk in that. But traditionally what we've seen is the board working within their expressed authority, and if the member still disagrees, as our general counsel pointed out, you serve a writ in superior court, and then the judge still has to work within those same confines. I don't think the judge would have the ability to put Mr. Heller back into the classic plan. Mr. Heller's not asking that. I respect that. Nor do I believe that the judge could waive the contributions. But what the judge could do is say, SDCERS, you need to pay damages to the member. You caused financial damage. And then if coincidentally that was the exact same amount that Mr. Heller would owe SDCERS plus, you know, attorney's costs, then it becomes settled. But really, I think what you're seeing here is just your staff and your expert counsel trying to navigate case law and different statutory requirements that we are forced to follow.
So, Greg, I think you make a very, very good point, and that's what I was trying to head to. I don't know that we, as this body, can do what Mr. Heller is asking for, and I apologize for all the things that Mr. Heller has gone through, but I think this is above us. I feel like the court needs to judge on this in order to give change. You know, laws changed by courts. I don't know that I don't read the same. I'm not reading it the same way you are, Mr. Brewster. Sorry, that we have the authority to do what you're asking. I would love to. God, I would love to. I would just press that button, just give that money, put that in the account. And it's our fault, which is where I'm having the biggest struggle with it. It is our fault as a body, but I don't know that we have the leeway to do that. I'm not clear that we have the ability to do this. Not how I'm reading it. I want to, and I've been trying to figure it out, but I don't see where we can.
Is this the type of incident that could go to an administrative judge?
Well, per your board rules, you can send any of these matters to administrative judge, but I do think, this is my personal opinion, Bobby, is that you have the facts and the law before you, that you can make a decision, because the administrative law judge, again, is just another recommendation, not something binding on this board. So you'd have a opinion from a retired judge, opinion from your fiduciary counsel, from staff, and you have to juggle those opinions.
So we have opinions from our fiduciary counsel and from IRS counsel.
From tax counsel?
From tax counsel. I'm sorry, yeah, tax counsel already.
Yes.
I want to
So at this
also,
point,
yeah, I was just going to say, Elvin, I agree with how you put it and the seriousness of it. And in thinking about errors that we make, such as this, we took that into consideration even when setting CEO Rademacher's pay and determining that, because we do take it that seriously. And we don't think that we should totally be left off the hook. So I just wanted to agree with what you're saying and reflect how we have taken it into consideration and taken responsibility for it. And that's all.
at this point, go ahead.
If no recommendation is made today, will this still go to the board tomorrow for discussion and
Yes.
voting? Okay.
If anyone agrees with Chris, I need a second. Hearing none.
Okay, so my first motion dies for lack of a second. Okay, so my second motion is more aimed at trying to avoid this in the future. Somehow, as you've read, there's this litany of opportunities to have avoided this, and that hasn't happened. We have the benefit of an independent audit committee which has a role of looking into practices and recommending how we can improve our practices going forward. I'd like to make a motion that we ask the audit committee to look at what happened in this circumstance and recommend procedures and practices going forward that would avoid this occurring again.
You know, I don't know that we need to make that a motion. I sit on the audit committee, and the internal auditor reports to the audit committee, and I will ensure that she puts that on her audit plan for this coming year.
I'm more than happy to have internal audit look at that. The one thing that I really just wanted to highlight is that I don't believe it's the audit committee's responsibility to dictate how to run the business. They're more doing the oversight. It used to be that way, but the audit community decided to cut consulting out of auditing. So,
But there could be a procedure.
but in discussions with management's responses and looking at the risks and explaining what we have done, because as I've reported before, because we've talked about this case before, is we have done a root cause analysis of what happened, why did it happen, and how do we keep this from ever happening again. That's very important. We take that very, very seriously from delivery member services perspective, and we would appreciate sharing that in a more formal way through the audit committee, and the board can either say, yes, we think that that's enough, or no, it's not enough. So, yeah, we could definitely have the audit committee take a look at it, investigate it.
Well, I was thinking about internal audit.
Yes.
Right.
Internal audit, yes.
Yeah, no, and I was just, I'm sorry, and then maybe I'm misunderstanding things a bit, but I looked at the audit committee charter, and it says its purpose is to assist the Board of Administration in fulfilling the board's oversight responsibilities, financial, so on and so forth, system of internal controls, and process for monitoring compliance with laws and regulations and so forth. So I understand, I get it, and I thank you, Bobby, for bringing it to their attention. So that's good. And I actually think, to Tom's point, it might be, speaking against my motion, it might be appropriate there be some other motion that goes forward to the board.
So, Madam Chair, I'd like to put a motion that we send, and sorry, Johnny, against your advice, send the appeal of Jonathan Heller to an administrative judge. I think it warrants that. I think it's serious enough. I think it's important enough that we make the recommendation to send it to an administrative judge.
Second.
All right. Call for the vote.
Just a moment, please. I still have to edit.
You ready?
Yeah.
Motion to recommend.
And just to point something out, Mr. Heller doesn't need to do that if he doesn't want to. It'd be an opportunity, but the opportunity
The matter.
of the administrative law judge is that there is no cost to Mr. Heller unless he chooses to retain an attorney.
To a hearing officer.
And Mr. Heller, the outcome of that will be that the administrative law judge's opinion will come back to this body to be approved or not.
Can I ask a question? What happens if we deny that motion? Don't we go back to this original piece and we're right back to where we started originally? So why bother to go do this motion? Can you help me understand that?
Yes, absolutely, because I feel if we get an administrative independent person, I'm not an attorney. I'm not a judge. God help us if I was. I'm hoping for help to maybe see something that we're not seeing, or potentially see something in a different way. But I feel like this person's going to be in the same confines that we are. So then I know that I'm thinking in the right way, and also the appeal is supposed to go in this direction, right? Because I'm having a hard time bridging the gap between us making a mistake and the massive burden that it causes on Mr. Heller's family. If I were in his shoes, I would feel a ton of bricks on me all the time if I had this on top of me. And I cannot bridge that chasm at this current time. Like, if we were going to vote right now, I would vote to deny, to the denial of the appeal. And I'm not allowed to do that. My fiduciary responsibility does not allow me to do that. So, like, I don't know what to do. I'm in public, like, I have a hard time with this one. I don't know what to do. I spent a lot of time on this reading, and I couldn't bridge the gap.
Bobby?
Johnny, is there a downside to going to an administrative judge? I mean, we will have one more opinion. That's the downside.
Chair, I'd like to clarify or comment on Alvin's comment. He said he's looking for an independent opinion. I work for the board, and so I am not an advocate for just denying or granting a benefit. My job is, and your fiduciary counsel's job is, to advise you of what we think your fiduciary duties and the laws require you to do. So to that extent, I hope that you do not see me as an advocate to deny anything, frankly, unless that's really what I believe and we believe is required by that. But to get to your question, Bobby, is there a downside? Perhaps. Again, Alvin said he didn't want to vote and make a decision. You can send this to administrative hearing, but it's going to come back, and you're going to still need to vote. And so it's still your vote and not a rubber stamp. So if a retired judge says, I recommend that you deny it, you're still going to have to vote to do that, or they recommend you grant it. And you still deal with that conflict of what your fiduciary counsel and your general counsel has recommended, has said what we think the plans require you to do and what the law requires you to do, and then what administrative law judge requires you to do.
May I just add a comment? I think you're asking for the pros and cons. I think I agree 100% with our counsel here, is that Johnny is actually an independent voice for this board. He doesn't work for me, he works for you. I just make sure that I help him be successful in his job, removing obstacles and stuff. Additionally, fiduciary counsel doesn't work for Johnny. Fiduciary counsel works for this board. So you already have independent voices on your side, and so that they're just communicating through Johnny. The challenge that we have when we go to Superior Court or administrative law judges is that these are not people that are well versed in retirement law or our specific body of laws or cases, and you have to educate them. You may recall we recently had a case that went to a hearing officer, which we agreed with the hearing officer's conclusion, but not the journey or how they supported their conclusion. And that's just a challenge. And whether you're in Superior Court or an administrative hearing, is how effectively can you lay out the legal landscape for the administrative hearing judge.
Thank you.
Tom?
So in our previous action item, we heard that an administrative hearing could cost $10,000 to $15,000 roughly, which would then just bring us back to this same scenario. And I would not be in support of this motion.
Well, I am going to make the motion to agree with staff and deny the appeal of Jonathan Heller.
Johnny, was there something else you were going to add real quick?
I was just going to say, Bobby, I think you do have a motion on the floor in a second, so I think it's at least appropriate to vote on that motion, and if it fails, to have an
Oh, I
alternate
do?
motion.
I do. Okay.
I'm sorry, Elvin, you made the motion? I made the motion, yeah. Yeah, and Chris seconded it, okay. Yeah, so we have to take a vote.
We just need to vote on the motion and fail, or succeeds or fails.
Just to clarify, if I may, Madam Chair, we are voting on motion to recommend the matter to be sent to a hearing officer at the moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Can we put the second in there?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm the second. And just to be clear, it's in the discretion of Mr. Heller as to whether he wants to avail himself of that opportunity. We're not forcing him to do that.
I disagree with that. I think if you send this to a hearing officer, it will go to a hearing officer. And I suppose you're right if Mr. Heller doesn't want to plead his case, but we will have a hearing.
Okay.
Mr. Brewster, would you like to cast? Okay. With all votes in, we have 4 nays and 2 yeas.
Okay, now, I would like to make the motion to deny the appeal of Jonathan Heller. I need a second.
I'll second it.
Just a moment, I'll just have to add that motion verbiage. And for this motion, we have 4 yeas and 2 nays.
Thank you, Mr. Heller, for coming today. As you can tell, we are all very sympathetic with the situation that occurred, and we sincerely apologize.
Thank you for your time.
All right, moving on. Staff's recommendation to review or amend the various charters: Audit Committee, Internal Audit Charter, the CEO Charter, Board Meeting Policy, Fraud and Criminal Acts Policy, Return to Work After Retirement Policy, Approval of City Retirement Benefits by the Membership Policy, and Board Rule 3.70 regarding reciprocity. There's no one from staff that's going to speak on this matter, so may I have a motion and a second from the committee?
Can I make a comment?
Oh, of course you can.
On the CEO charter, I have a question and a request. What this says about the CEO's responsibility is, among other things, sets the board meeting agenda, placing on the agenda for the next board meeting items the CEO deems appropriate. When you do that, do you not meet with the chair of the board or the chair of the committee? In other words, is that a collaborative process, or how does that work?
So, Mr. Brewster has the policy from there.
Oh,
There's
here.
also other ways that items. Mr. Brewster has the policy in front of him, but there's also other ways for the items to be put on the agenda. Traditionally, this board has delegated that responsibility for setting the agenda to the CEO. There's a lot of things that we do just in the course of business, such as in our disability committee meeting. I set the agenda when the disabilities are ready for committee, approval. We've got the budget every March. That just goes on the agenda. So there's a lot of things that we just put on the agenda. There's other items that board members or committee members, like during good of the order. I know Mr. Brewster has asked for, hey, can the Disability Committee talk about this issue at the next meeting? Absolutely, that goes on the agenda. So traditionally, the agendas are set by the CEO, but in conjunction with working with the committees and the board. Before every board meeting, we have pre-briefs with committee chairs. I do the disability and the business and governance with help of team members. Sarah Dixon does the audit committee, and Karina Coleman does the investment committee. And so they talk about what's on the agenda. Should we take things off the agenda? Should we add things on the agenda? Also, I do that with the board president and the board vice president. We talk about those agendas. So that's kind of an overall summary of how those agendas are put together. The last thing I will say is that we're a pretty collegial group. Generally, when a committee member or a board member wants to talk about something, the answer is usually yes. You know, let's put it on the agenda and talk about it.
Yeah, in some cases to your detriment. Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to make one proposal here. What this says is that that for the board meetings, if any 3 members want to put something on the agenda, then it will be placed on the agenda. With respect to the committees, it says 1 less than a quorum. And it seems to me that if the board requires 3 and these committees are quite a bit smaller, then we can just say if 2 people ask for it. So my request is to modify that piece about the 1 less than a quorum to say for committees, if any 2 members request it, since for the board it's for any 3.
Why?
Because it doesn't make sense to me that you would have to have more people to request to put something on the board, the agenda of a committee, than to put it on the agenda of the board.
Greg, do you have any comment?
Oh, this is the fun part about governance. There are no set rules on how we have to do this. Really what you're trying to do is to come up with just a general guideline to make things run as smooth as possible with the least amount of bureaucracy. That's really what it comes down to. The other things I see that, you know, if you look at Robert's Rules of Order, how complex it is, or if you look at other organizational governance structures, it's to also protect the body from, do I want to choose my words correctly here, from repetitive work that doesn't help move the organizational forward. So for example, if I was on the committee and every month I wanted to talk about issue A, and the board's already addressed issue A 12 times and they don't want to talk about issue A anymore, you know, how do you keep the board moving along so you don't have to talk about issue A anymore? So when I look at these different parameters, that's really kind of what you're doing is like, generally business is going to run just fine. If other people want to have input into the business, how do they do that? But how do you protect yourself against an individual voice which is not being productive to the body as a whole? And you know what Chris is saying, I still think we're in the gray zone. That's fine. If we want to stay with the current process isn't broken. I haven't seen any problems with it, so it's really up to preference.
Well, do we have a motion to move as it is?
I'll move it.
Does anybody want to second it?
Elvin did.
Elvin did?
Chris, did you want to change the motion or just leave it as?
You know, the way things are going today, I think I'm going to go with this one. Because I actually want to be on the winning side this time.
With all votes in, Madam Chair, this motion passes 6-0.
Good way to read the room.
Well, it wasn't tough.
Okay. We have finished our action items. And Cynthia, we have your last report. Yes, we can. And you wore my favorite shoes. We're not going to be able to replace your enthusiasm in your reports.
I appreciate you so much, Bobby. Thank you. Thank you all so much for your attention to the very important matters that are determined by this board. I truly thank you. I'm pleased to announce that a veteran team member, Selene Rodriguez, has been promoted to retirement counselor, and she joins our excellent counseling team, which also includes Sarema Valenzuela and Sarah Levy. I'm very pleased with the new structure of having Sarah as the supervising counselor lead their work. Streamlining and enhancing the retirement education and counseling process has been one of our biggest accomplishments in recent years. We had another example of that this morning in the disability hearing where the committee approved a non-industrial disability for a member of the port. To me, that's such a beautiful story because that's a perfect partnership. The port reached out to me about a terminally ill member, and we were able to help them. Sarema Valenzuela, in her native language of Spanish, was able to help this family and get everything taken care of so that his wife would be able to continue on. And I am just very thankful. That's been really the most, some of the most meaningful work I've done at SDCERS. And I always thank Sandra Clausen for all that she's taught me about that process. So I just really want to point out how important that is. Earlier in the meeting, seems like quite a long time ago now, Greg presented the action plan, and a key item is benefit process best practices. Victoria Fedelizo is the lead for this very important project in member services, and we are eager to complete this complicated task. Also on the action plan, Jessica Taylor is leading the member services side for phase 3 of reopening the city's pension plan tiers. She's been educating the potential members about their options and working closely with the city on that. Jessica and Selene are both out somewhere instructing our new police recruits on their future benefits, and we absolutely love being able to see our members and work with them, of course. It has been an exceptionally busy season for our call center with 2 new staff members currently in training. And I assure you training is very essential. It's a wonderful team, and I'm very proud of how hard they are working and how serious they take everything. I'm thankful for my 16 years at SDCERS, and I know that the team is well prepared to move forward successfully. I want to thank all of my teammates for their dedication to serving our more than 26,000 members. I love to say, members created this pension system back in the 1920s, and I thank you, board members, for always remembering your duty to our members. I want to thank Sandra Clausen for her most excellent work leading benefits administration. I feel so confident as I retire that our members will be well taken care of because everyone at SDCERS truly cares about our members. One team member's recent comment summed it up for me when I announced I was retiring. Paul Detchen, who I've worked with for the past 10 years, said, "Don't worry, CQ, you've turned us all into empaths. We will take care of the members."
Oh,
Thank you all so much for your support. This concludes my report.
thank you.
Cynthia, can you remind us how many years of service with city and with SDCERS?
I know it's hard because I look so young. I've been, 16 years with SDCERS and 10 years prior at the city working like 4 different departments and for the mayor's office, and so just very thankful. I will always be doing that outreach of promoting SDCERS, and I always defend everything that the city port or airport does. Love our plan sponsors.
Yeah, and can I just add that I met Cynthia when she was a reporter for the La Jolla Light.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was the lifeguard chief. I think we went on a tour of Black's Beach or something like that.
I think it was Torrey Pines.
Yeah.
Right.
And a variety of other places. So, I wasn't supposed to tell any more Speedo stories, so sorry, Greg. But it was a very business-like tour. She was wanting to know about cliff erosion or something like that. Anyway, we've known each other a long time.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Oh, how sweet. Benefits Administration.
Good morning. You have in your materials my very first Benefits Administration Division report. You will notice it's a little more conversational than what Marcel used to provide for you. No bullet points, no charts, nothing like that. And I also did manage to personally acknowledge every current Benefits Administration member in the report too. We're sneaking their names in. Just a few quick updates since the time the report was written. We are about a week away from the election deadline for our Prop B Phase 3 employees. We still don't know exactly how many will join, and they will have 60 days after that time to fully fund. But Paul Detchen, our BA supervisor who's leading that Prop B team, has begun weekly meetings with the city and the city's trust fund administrator principal to make sure that those funds do get over here and are properly allocated. Retiree health has been a bit of a challenge. We knew that going into this open enrollment period that it would be challenging. We're down some staff. And with the city's transition to the calendar year for their new plan offerings, on top of our normally very busy time period at the beginning of the year for the private plans to renew and the Medicare Part B premiums to update, it was incredibly challenging. We missed a good number of reimbursements. We put as many as we could on the weekly payroll so people didn't have to wait too long, a week or two. But anytime we miss a reimbursement, we know it's challenging for retirees. So that was a difficult period. We're hoping to not be in the role of the primary administrators of the retiree health benefit next year. The city is moving forward with their contract with an outside agency to administer the city's retiree health plan. Their contract negotiations are finished. We're hoping that that contract will go to City Council this month. I can tell you I did not see it on next week's council agenda, but there's a couple more weeks yet, so hopefully that will get through. And then lastly, on the over 10,000 report, you'll see it's linked items related to a retiree death that wasn't notified to SDCERS timely. That matter has actually been resolved. We had the overpayment of about 13 months of payments for the retiree, and then we had the surviving spouse's continuance benefit that was due. The family actually paid the difference between the two, and we've received that payment, so that matter resolved. Yes.
Question on the overpayments. For Mr. Heller, if tomorrow the board votes to deny the appeal, when will that payment plan start? And will interest start accruing ever again? Or because the interest was taken away, that won't?
I'll jump in on that.
Sure.
Yeah, so you're correct. So the board had previously waived interest on the historical interest that should have been paid. We covered that earlier in the agenda. Moving forward, we would, if the board were to deny it tomorrow, we would present Mr. Heller with another communication saying, please pay your back contributions. You've got a period, a window where you can pay those without interest, until our next interest payment period. And as you had brought up, there's different ways for him to take care of that, depending on whether he wants to cut a check or have it transferred from another tax qualified plan. But if he goes over an interest payment period, then interest would start again on that. And I call it, my term, financing interest, is you can either pay a lump sum or you can finance it over a period of time.
And follow up to that, is Mr. Heller, when he becomes retirement age eligible, is he allowed to retire with these contributions still not paid back? Or how does that all work?
No, we don't allow them to either retire or enter drop when there's unpaid contributions.
And does the airport and port have a drop program?
He wouldn't be eligible anyway, but in general, we don't allow people to retire in any fashion with missed contributions.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I have a question. Yeah, sure. I take it you're covering item 8 at the same time? Is that essentially what you're doing?
Yes.
Okay. So on the Matt Spicer item, it's the last bullet. It says he was informed that his reciprocity was retroactively denied. What does that even mean? Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, it says Matt Spicer, City of San Diego Fire Safety Manager. In 2017, the member was informed that his reciprocity was retroactively denied because of an overlap in membership.
Yes, so
Do you want to call a friend?
I might. Looks like, is Cynthia?
Yeah, I can just do it from here. It's because we determined, he had gotten some original letters saying it was approved. Reciprocity is a difficult statewide issue. I have seen this before. So when we do our review and we found out that there truly was an overlap in service credit, we had to notify the member of that. Now, the member has 2 options there. Go and work with the other agency. I've done this a number of times. Go and work with the agency and find out if there really was an overlap. Did you really work 2 shifts in one day, or is it some weird vacation run-out thing? Sometimes it can be fixed, sometimes it cannot. So that is why that is there. But in this case, we have reached out multiple times and we had just not heard back from this member on that. So this one has probably 2 different ways it could be resolved.
So Cynthia, does that mean that the credits he got at the other entity are not something that we would recognize, and so is that the gist of it?
I can do it really succinctly unless Greg would like to. Just, in a perfect situation, you've got your service credit here, it stops, and it starts here. That's perfect. That's how so many things work. We have cases where, through various types of mistakes, the person literally is on 2 payrolls at once. That's not legal, and you can't get paid for 2 systems on the same day. So that is what we call a reciprocity overlap. And we have a whole procedure. We help people with it all the time. Sometimes it's fixed, sometimes it's not. But in cases, the member does need to take some action.
Thank you.
How does that occur?
First answer is way back in the past. Not sure everybody was using their rules as consistently, so as with any organization, we do have to clean up some things like that. There have been a number of things that have fixed that going forward. An old-fashioned thing was people were allowed to run out vacation time and go start at a new place. That is the most classic. We got that fixed in the municipal code. Took us about 4 years to fight, and now we can resolve that one on our own. But there are cases, in my mind, it's more likely where you'd have maybe a safety member, sorry, I'd pick on a firefighter, but you're working one shift here and you don't realize that it's against your pension rules because you're 25 years old and you go work for the other agency at the same time, and then we come back and it's like, we can't fix that. You really worked for 2 agencies at the same time. So what you do is you only get service credit from one of them, and maybe it breaks your reciprocity. That's the worst case scenario.
Got it. Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. IT? Michelle?
And Elvin, you're missing mine too. Good morning, or is it still morning? Following the theme of today of future planning, I'd like to provide an update on the IT strategic plan. So the strategic plan that we're presenting to you that's in your board material goes beyond a single year. We planned out a 4-year strategic plan. This document lays out the IT vision and technology roadmap for the SDCERS infrastructure, security framework, applications, innovation, and overall program management. This is intended to be a living document and will be reviewed annually to incorporate organizational, technology, and priority changes. This document has several important purposes, and to highlight a few. First, it's intended to give you confidence that your SDCERS technical team has a plan to keep your infrastructure and applications up to date. Second, that we're keeping up with security and technical trends to keep our environment up to date. And lastly, it provides a tool to help manage technical cost and bring efficient and effective solutions to the business. It's also important to have a commitment from the entire organization to align organizational priorities and commitment to these significant projects. Without sharing too much about our technical environment, I wanted to highlight a few of those enterprise-wide projects that we'll be initiating in the next fiscal year. We'll update and replace some of our server room equipment, operating system updates for desktops and servers, implementation of security enhancement tools, updates to this room, the boardroom technologies, and Chris, what you've been waiting for, getting our foot in the door for the cloud technology and migrating to Microsoft 365. 365 migration is an enterprise solution, but it's much different than your own personal account migrating into 365. And for this, we'll be involving an integration vendor to help make sure we set that footprint securely and safely before we do this migration. So developing this plan was a team effort, and I'd like to thank Norma Frank and Sean Kilback for their time researching and evaluating the environment to support the development of this roadmap. I'd also like to thank the technology team for their review and commitment to this very aggressive schedule. FY25 is going to be a very busy year for the IT team, and they've all reviewed this plan and are fully committed to making sure that we meet our goals. And with that, this concludes my updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was excellent. Thank you very much, Michelle. You have no idea the confidence that you instill in all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Do all the staff that are hybrid or virtual have laptops that they come in and then connect to their desktops here, or how does that all look?
So SDCERS does work a hybrid schedule. So most of our staff, not all of our staff, but most of our staff do have remote days that they work. They have SDCERS equipment at home that's been issued to them. So that equipment that they keep at home is also managed by our IT team. We push updates to them. We manage the securities and all of the updates on that equipment. So just to kind of elaborate on that, for them, in order to connect in, there are multiple layers of security for them to authenticate in order to create that tunnel into our network.
So similar to how we do it at the city, or a little bit different, a little bit more?
Very similar.
Very similar. And then how big is your team, and how many vacancies do you have?
On our team, we have 4 SDCERS staff, including myself. So it's myself, 2 program managers, Sean Kilpack, the IT operations manager, and Norma Frank, who's the application services manager, and then Joe Saucedo, who's our application manager. We augment our technology skill with master service agreements, and most of those individuals reside on staff, and that's 8 of them.
Thank you.
It's a large group.
It is a large group. And there is a lot to manage. It's interesting, this plan really just lays out kind of the initiatives and significant projects. It doesn't highlight the regular operations that this team supports, which it's a hamster wheel trying to stay ahead of, the bad actors out there and making sure that we're always being defensive and proactive in our security.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Michelle? Thank you.
Thank you.
Johnny.
Thank you. I just want to give a quick thank you and congratulations to Cynthia Queen. Cynthia was one of the people that hired me, and I came from a culture I was not thriving in to a Cynthia culture, and one I have just loved and been part of for all those years. So congratulations.
Could have gone the other way, Cynthia.
Real quick, your Form 700s are due April 2nd,
Oh,
so
yeah.
please don't forget that. That's a fun project. And in case you missed it, I did want to reintroduce Jamar Montgomery, our new medical review officer. Jamar comes from San Diego County Employees Retirement Association with 7 years of experience being their supervising disability officer. I already talked to their general counsel and laughed because I had stolen him, but he understands. And Jamar just comes with just great accolades from both the county, everywhere you go. He fits our culture so well. He's just a compassionate, stand-up person who cares about the members, and I think that's what I want. I want that person, Jamar, talking to our members who come broken, looking to see what benefits they qualify for. So thank you, Jamar, for joining our team, and I'll take any questions you have on my report.
Any questions?
Yeah, John, just one question on the Farrington versus SDCERS. So,
The lawsuit?
Yeah.
Okay.
When something like this comes up, is it your discretion as to whether we defend or settle, or is that something that comes to the board first? In other words, hey, here's the case, here's what I recommend. How does that work?
We'll talk about this in closed session tomorrow. So
Oh, okay.
To answer your question, I protect SDCERS between board meetings, but I take direction from SDCERS.
Got it. So, okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank
Bobby.
you, Johnny. Do we have any closed session reports? All right. Thank you, Johnny. So this meeting is adjourned, 11:23 a.m.
But before we turn off the microphones, just questions and comments from staff and committee members. I just wanted to express my thank you to Cynthia Queen. It has just been a real pleasure over the past 6 years to work with you. We did a personality assessment, and you'll never guess, Cynthia was a wow. So she lives up to that, and I'm really going to miss her in our board meeting debriefs where we get all of the SDCERS staff in the room. We talk about, hey, what happened at the committee meetings? What happened at the board meetings? What's going on in the organization? And over the years, I have seen Cynthia pantomime her report. She's danced her way through it and even rapped her report. So I'm really going to miss those special moments, and I've just appreciated you just having just being a real champion for our members and member services in your team. It's just it's been really great working with you, and we're going to miss you here tremendously, but we're happy for you and where you are and wish you all the best. So thank you, Cynthia. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, I think I'm going to move to adjourn the meeting in recognition of Cynthia Queen.